Welcome to Wildspire. You get to be a fly on the wall for my intimate conversations with entrepreneurs who are changing the world. I'm your host, Stephanie Benedetto, coach, storyteller, and unmarketer at The Awakened Business, helping coaches and change-making entrepreneurs unleash their inspired message and share it with playful unmarketing. I'll ask curious questions and explore uncharted waters with my guest today. Anything can happen when we step into the unknown of infinite creativity, and that's where we're going to play. My guest today is Sophie Chiche. We have a different kind of conversation about getting things done. In this exploration, we'll look at loving and kind productivity and the misunderstandings that we use to try to get things done that often just end up making us feel bad and getting burnt out and overworked. Sophie Chiche earned master's degrees in business and journalism in her native city of Paris, France, and then added another one in psychology soon after moving to Los Angeles. Her most recent venture, Be Current, teaches productivity as a gateway to purpose. She comes to it with a unique blend gathered over the past 30 years of building teams, writing books, running companies, coaching peak performers, and raising children. Her new book, War and Piece of Cake, comes out in spring 2022. When she's not doing these things, Sophie can be found freeform dancing in a burgundy tutu or riding her Harley on the PCH. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Sophie Chiche. Hi, Sophie, and welcome to my Wildspire podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
I'm so excited to be here. We've been having wonderful conversations. I cannot wait to see where this one takes us.
Yeah, so I kind of feel like I want to share how the synchronicities of how we met, because I have met some amazing people through this productivity app called FocusMate. So I know that it's a remote co-working platform, and that's where I met your husband, who's just such a lovely, dynamic person, and caught me on a day when I was really kind of down and not myself, actually, which was really sort of funny. And he said to me, like, "Oh, you seem kind of tired, or your energy's really low. And I was like, "Oh, I do." But it was like he brought me up like immediately just talking to him. And then he said, "Oh, we started up a conversation. It's like, you need to meet my wife. She's into all this cool stuff. She's doing coaching and she's got this beautiful productivity program that she's putting together." And that's how it happened. And so we connected and found out that we have a lot in common, actually.
Exactly. I love those. Oh, wait, someone I've been hanging out with for years?
Yeah.
That's crazy. It's such a big world.
So when we were pondering what we might like to explore today, you had brought up one of the things that became clear through the pandemic is that the excuse that many of us use for why we don't do the things that we say we want to do is no longer valid. And that is, I don't have time. Because for so many people, not everyone, but for a lot of people, the pandemic just opened up this space. And they still weren't, in many cases, doing the things that they said they wanted to do. So what do you see is really going on there? Why don't we?
Well, that is a big question. One of the reasons we don't is because we imagine what it would be to actually do it. And we stay in that fantasy of what that would be, and telling ourselves we don't have time keeps this fantasy alive, that in some ways is more safe and comfortable than to actually go out and try to do it. Like if I think of myself as someone who wants to write a book, and for 10 years, I say I'm wanting to write a book and I'm wanting to write a book. It's like there's this excitement that I'm doing something that I really want to do, but I'm not actually doing it because I don't have time. It keeps me in this non-threatening spot, because the second I'm actually writing a book and I actually do go to publishers and maybe I get rejected or maybe I get accepted, God forbid, it's even sometimes more scary. And so keeping things in the ethers of wanting them to happen as opposed to turning them into actionable, let's do something about it, is in some ways safer for a lot of people, because then there is no rejection and there is no risk that maybe lots of people love it, and that's scary as well. And so I think this pandemic, as you introduced us with, it has brought a reality to people because now they're not commuting, say, for 2 hours to some office. Well, that's a good time to write a book. And you had those 2 hours before, so where are they now? And it's still not happening because it's not time, it's energy, it's focus, it's aligned desire. As we were just saying, like, is it is it really aligned for me to get my head out, like to put my nose and say, okay, this is, I'm standing by, I want to say something to the world, is it's a very gutsy predicament. And a lot of people haven't done the work to manage that fear and manage that scary spot. And that is what I think we need to manage. We need to manage us. We need to manage our own beasts and our own shadows and our own fears and our own stories that tell us that maybe we don't deserve it, or maybe we're not capable, or, we all have our different noise in our heads. So I think it's the new kind of energy, and self-management is kind of the new version of time management, I think. Mm-hmm.
Energy and self-management. That's cool. Yeah, like, I'm wondering, would you be willing to use me as an example here on this and
Sure.
give me a little bit of perspective perhaps on something that...
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you. So a little over a year ago, I did the NaNoWriMo writing challenge. So it's National Novel Writing Month because there was a book I wanted to write, or a book I thought I might want to write. And I had really just a couple of characters fleshed out and the ideas I wanted to explore. And I wanted to explore, funnily enough, I don't usually say that, but I'm saying it now, interestingly enough, about time. I wanted to write a character who has no sense of past and future. She has no past and future. She just lives in the moment. She lives in the present. I was like, what is that even like? Is she completely boring? Like, who is she? Like, who is this person? I want to write this character and explore themes of time and identity. And so I leapt into this month, and the goal of the month was to write 50,000 words. And I did it. And it was an amazing journey. And I did it in such a way that it was haphazard all over the freaking place. Like, in order to get myself to do it, I completely left any idea of judgment or the inner critic behind and just wrote completely self-indulgently. I did end up writing like a bunch of scenes that I didn't even know what they were, just like ideas for scenes that I thought would be fun. And then I randomly would pick one and then I write.
Oh, wow.
And then the next day I'd randomly pick and write. So it's all out of sequence, which is perfect for this book, which turns out it has, no, it's not at all. It has 7 different subplots. It has 3 different realities. It's time travel. There's like a paramilitary thing. I'm like, where the hell did this come from? All right. So I did this. And then I'm like, it's not done, but I do kind of have an ending. Toward the end of the month, I didn't know where it was going. And it surprised me, like something emerged. And I was like, holy shit, like this is, where did this, oh my God. Right. But it's a mess. It's truly a mess. I feel like I couldn't even bring this to an editor. And so I've reread it and I don't even remember what I've written. I made a list of the plots. As I told you, I found 7 subplots and like what happens in each one to try to identify, have questions like what questions need to be answered, what's missing, the gaps to write it. And I'm like, and I've written a little since then, but I'm like, I don't even know what to do with it. It's not like I have a rough draft I could bring to an editor even. It's a mess. I don't even know what order it goes in. So I've been stumped. And it's been one of those things that I really want to take it through to completion because I want to see what happens, just to finish it, just to publish it, to see, is anyone interested in this? Because it's interesting to me.
It's interesting to me.
So yeah. So what do you think is like, what could you say? And I'm sure that somebody listening probably can relate in some way. Like there's something that they have and they know it's something and they want to take it through the rest of the way, or it's something they want to complete and they haven't, and they don't know, like, what is going on? Like, how can I move it?
It's interesting because as you were talking, I was thinking, because I've written four books, one not published and three published. And the process as I know it is messy. And as I was doing it, I remember thinking it's a little bit like birthing a child, where, trust me, when my daughter came out, it was very messy. There's a mess there. And then you go home with this little thing that's alive and that's going to be that is a human being. And what do you do with that? And similar questions that what you just asked and apply, like, what do I do with this? And how do I raise her? And how do I make sure she has integrity? like all these questions, like what order should I do things in? How often should I talk about, just like, woo. And so there's some parallels to part of parenting and writing is messy, and to be not only comfortable with it, but to truly expect it. Because if it came out of you fully formed with 3 PhDs and married with 3 children, they wouldn't be coming out of you. Just
That would be a little freakish in itself.
Exactly.
Kind of disturbing.
Exactly. And so, although since your heroine doesn't seem to have a relationship to time, that could be super interesting that she hops around and her children are different ages, because she's detached from that. It's kind of an interesting idea too. I'm fascinating, by the way. I want to read this book, so I will offer very regular support if you want it to help. So what happened is you did this beautiful thing with a lot of people are finding out, challenges and 5 days of this and a month of that, and or people will do kind of like a push, to kind of create something, and because the truth is, if you have 2 hours or if you have 3 weeks, you will do it in the time you have if you have to do it, right? So if that's why a lot of people do what they need to do last night, right? They're doing a speech this morning and they do it last night because they know that they'll do it because that's all, they don't have 3 weeks, so they have to do it. And so our psyche is, when we work with it, collaborating is beautiful that way, because if you say to yourself, I am going to do this in a month. So maybe one thing I would recommend is what could be the next, what can we even right now? And maybe with your audience, we could support you in just saying, okay, in the next month, what? Like I have my character developed that I know where she starts and I know where she ends, which would be maybe a little bit less messy, or maybe that is already something you have. So that could be, of the 7 plots, do I want to keep 5 or do I want to keep 7? Like we could identify a number of things that you would give yourself a certain amount of time and you would deliver, because you would have some sort of, you would what is that word? You would self-direct yourself similarly to the way you did when you were doing that month with other people, right? Like that commitment came out of someone said, let's all do it together. And off we went, we all would do it. And so the other thing that I love doing is when I write a book, or one of my clients is writing a book, is I open a Trello board, which is, one of the places I coach people to organize their lives. And I open a book board, and that book board has a certain structure to it. And I'll tell you right now, because that might be something that could be a fun thing for you, is it starts with a list of questions. Why am I writing this book? Who is my ideal? I mean, the obvious ones, but also, where is this book in a bookstore? Like, where do I find it? Is it a philosophical tale? Is it a children's book that's kind of turned into some sort of, journey for a young adult? Is it? So all these questions are, and what I do is anytime I have 10, 15 minutes, I go to this board and I attempt to answer one question. That's what I ask myself to do. And so if you do 15 minutes, I mean, I think we can all find 10, 15 minutes in our lives a day, probably. And so it's not as daunting. Like people come to me and they're writing a book. It's like saying, I'm climbing Kilimanjaro or something. Well, you don't. When you're writing a book, you sit down for 20 minutes, an hour, 3, whatever it is, and you write a chapter, a paragraph. Hey, sometimes you brainstorm titles, whatever it is. So break it down into things that when you look at them, your body doesn't go like, that looks really frightening. Like to climb a mountain, maybe you go buy a pair of shoes and your body goes, oh, I can do that, right? Or maybe it's like I walk around the block at least once a day, every day for, a month. Or maybe it's I find a friend who wants to do a little hike with me, like, right? Like you set it up as something that is friendly to you, not frightening to you, is one of my, because at the end of the day, you are deciding to write this book. There's no teacher, there's no grade, there's no disappointed parent if you don't do it. For the most part, we're adults and we decide to do things. And yet we sometimes operate a little bit like we rebelling some force that is imposing it on us when we're the one that's decided or chose to do it, right? Does that resonate? You're laughing. Tell me.
Oh, it's so funny. I have had so many experiences of making up rules. Like I've been an entrepreneur. I've been working for myself for, oh my God, 25 years, more than 25 years. I don't know. So there's never been a boss, but I have been the worst boss sometimes. It's like I made up, I have to have this done by this time. And then I feel all this pressure and stressed out. And I remember the moment when I started seeing it. It was years ago when I was married. And I was stressing myself out because I had some self-imposed deadline that I had to get this thing done by Friday. And my husband said to me, is anybody going to notice if you don't get it done or if you wait till Monday? And I went, no, because you made that up, Steph, didn't you? Yes. And I started seeing how I make up the monsters.
and then you actually believe that they're going to eat you. Like you give them the power.
Yep. Yep. So that's why I was laughing at that.
that's yes, because we don't realize that we're setting up strategies, because we are setting up strategies. Like there's a part of you that thinks that if you commit to Friday, you are going to do it. That's one of the ways we push ourselves. But that's a little bit like counter, like I want to be a friend to me. I don't want to be some, horrible, I was going to say Nazi of sorts, I don't want to be like, like you have to do this. I mean, that's extreme, obviously. But it's like I used to relate to myself in a really, really abusive way. I think that's the word I want to use. And I've become a dear friend. And what's funny with that is I accomplish so much more, and I am so much more relaxed, and I am so much more able to feel satisfied. Like so many people I work with, they accomplish tons and they still end their day with like, I could have done more.
Yep.
And that is such a self-destructive, it is not kind. It is not kind. Like you done, maybe you accomplished 98 things and now you're upset because you should have done 100. But if you did do 100, you'd be upset because you should have done 106. Like it's kind of
you keep raising the bar.
You keep raising the bar. And since we can here go really deep, I think part of what happens, and I noticed it in my brother not long ago, because we were raised by very critical people, French people by definition, kind of it's in the DNA, to be very judgmental. And I noticed that he was setting himself up like there was never going to be a win. Like he sets himself up, he's going to do 16 things when really there's room to do 3. And so no matter what he does, even if he does 12, which is 4 times more than what is really truly possible here, it's still not this bar that's completely unrealistic, unkind, based on what, not even knowing how long things are going to take, often assuming that they're going to take whatever time, and then it takes, 5 times more, but not adjusting. Like, when you find out to say, I'm going to do my emails, it's going to take 20 minutes, but I'm in my emails and it's now an hour and a half. Well, said who that it was going to be 20 minutes? It's like, we kind of obey these internal rules, as you said, very, very appropriately. It's like we set up the structure in a way that's not kind. And that takes us to where I kind of always want to take any conversations I have around all this, which is how do we bring more self-love? Like, how do we approach productivity, not so much as like, yay, I accomplished even more widgets that I don't really care about. And I did it because I didn't sleep and I ate more sugar and I drank more coffee and I pushed myself like some really mean teacher would do to me. Like that's not, who's going to end up happy with a day like that? Like that's not a good recipe. So self-love for me has become like, if I approach my emails when I feel like doing my emails, and a lot of people will be like, I never feel like doing my emails. Maybe, but if I don't do my emails, there's things I don't like. I wouldn't have responded to you when you first reached out. There's beautiful things in emails that I don't want to miss.
Mm-hmm.
So it's also a choice for me. I could stop having my email altogether. And when you email me, it would say, this email no longer exists, and you'd find a different way to find me. But if you wanted to find me, you'd find a different way. We are in a culture that's of communication, that's of oversharing probably. And, so how do I enter I have to do my emails when my brain feels like doing it. I go 5 times faster, maybe more. Like it will take me actually 20 minutes. When if I do it when I don't want to do it, and part of me is just like shooting, it's kind of like like what you were sharing about your husband. Like I have to do it by Friday. And he goes, if the emails from Steph are not done by Friday in the forest, like, does anybody notice, type of thing. Um, I would argue that if you had a more collaborative approach, you would have probably done it by Friday, because it takes a lot of energy to be against ourselves, that fight of not wanting to do it, and postponing it, and now judging that we postponed it, and now procrastinating even more because now we feel shame. It's like, that is such a road of wasting energy, wasting time, wasting such precious RAM, as opposed to finding the most cooperative. Like, I don't know if you've been around toddlers. It's a visual that really helps me because I've had toddlers. And if you work against them, although you are twice their size, if not more, and you have so much power, and they win because they'll be tantruming on the ground and you'll be completely stuck in a store where they're yelling, they'll win because you didn't act in collaboration with that energy. When if you do it in collaboration, the toddler is often happy to line up and happy to come along, because there is not this control forcing energy. And I think it works for ourselves. Like if I approach myself like a controlling mother to my inner toddler, I scream in the middle of a store, a version of that, right? So I would say those are kind of the routes I would probably explore with you.
That's beautiful. And what occurred to me as we were talking about that is that I've made up that discovering how this story wants to be told is somehow different than writing it. Like that I have to, like I have more on it. Like when I wrote it, I just wrote it, right? Like what if I could just play like that in the discovering of it, in the like, I wonder what comes first. I wonder, does this belong here? Does it want to be in this story? Is it something else? Is it another story entirely? Do these belong together? How do they live together? And approach it with that kind of playfulness and creativity and
And
non-judgment.
curiosity. Yes.
Yes, and curiosity instead of, doing what I've been doing is like, but I don't know. And I like what you said about just answering questions, because I do still have a lot of questions like,
Mhm.
oh, what are the questions that I have about this? And spending a little time with those to see where it takes me.
And one of the questions I'd have for you, if I was making a list, is this a movie, not a book? There's something so visual about which you spoke right
it
away,
might not
right?
be a book. I talked to someone else and they were like, is it even a book? Does it have to
Yeah.
be? Do you have to know? And I was like, geez, I don't know.
That's what's beautiful about this work that I love doing with people, which is about incompatible beliefs. Because if you are aligned that you want your messaging to be out, let's say there's something you want to share, like this book obviously hits a nerve for you and you want to contribute something. It often comes from, like you said earlier, I'm curious, like, would other people also be interested? Which is a way of saying, like, would they come to my restaurant and try my gourmet meal or whatever? Like we have that. It's a beautiful, sacred thing that as humans we have. It's like we want to share, we want to pass on, we want a legacy, So when I hear about this idea of a book, to me, it becomes do the work so that your psyche is aligned with you doing it. and you're not resisting that. Like there's no energy spent in, should I, am I good enough? Do I really have something to say? Will people come to the field of corn? Like all of that, right? Because if this is all aligned, all of a sudden you're sitting somewhere and someone, I don't know, on a plane and says to you, one of my specialties, I take people with chaotic stories and I make movies out of them. And you'll be like, woo, because you'll be aligned. I mean, I don't know if you believe in that. Not everyone does, but if you are clear inside of you, somehow that person would have sat somewhere else, but they switched the seats and now they're sitting next to you, and that's your person that's going to move the needle for you. Now, if you're not aligned and you still have voices that are saying, like I was 350 pounds in my household, slightly raised by wolves, not a good idea to be sexy, successful, blah, blah. So, hey, 350 pounds makes sense, right? And I start until I resolve, and that's a really deep, I don't know, until I resolve that I'm safe when I'm exposed, I'm not exposing myself. I mean, there's a part of me that's there to protect me. Like fear can be, as long as you don't let it, be the driver of the car. Fear is the way that tells me don't jump off the roof, don't expose yourself in a intimate kind of vulnerable way to the world if you're scared shitless that something really bad's going to happen to you, because it will protect you. We have more of an instinct for survival than we have one for writing a book, So if you have a deep connection to if the world sees me, it's going to not be kind, let's say, like it's going to attack me of sorts and it's going to criticize me of sorts, then part of you will sabotage and will keep you not doing that stuff. And then all of a sudden there'll be an email that says, hey, join this, challenge for a month and do it. And that part of you is like, ooh, that's what I want. But then after the month, the other part takes over a little bit again. And that takes a moment, and you nurture that and you feed that and you're like, oh yeah, I get it. Like whatever your resistance might be or whatever your inner beliefs about all this might be, you need to tend to them. Because if truly you believe that, I don't know, say that, yes, you're exposed to the world and people really acknowledge your work, and now you have this responsibility of being a very established author, and what are you going to do with the second book, and whatever we might say to ourselves, not accompanying yourself through this terror that little child in there may feel, then you'll truly be in danger. Like I really truly believe that if we don't handle those stories that we tell ourselves, we could really hurt ourselves. And so I don't push. Like I sometimes coach people and they want to, one of my dear friends / client is an actress and wants an Oscar. And it's like that's all she thinks about and talks about and wants it, the same way that people sometimes talk about writing a book for 20 years, whatever. And so one day I was with her and I said, why don't you close your eyes for a moment? I want to test something. And so I'm describing, she's sitting there, she's wearing her gown. It's the night of the Oscars. Her movie is in the selection and poof, they say her name. And now she has to get up and walk there with her gown and her friends and high-fiving, and she literally peed in her pants of fear. She literally was so terrified. And I said, do you think that part of you that supports you and protects you and loves you, do you think it's going to let you go do that if it's that terrifying? So we need to align those things first before or simultaneously. You can also do it as Gay Hendricks, this beautiful Big Leap book, where he talks about the upper limit problem, where you reach that, I'm on my way to get that Oscar. And if I don't work myself through what that means to my childhood belief that I'm a failure, if I don't accompany that, then it's super incompatible, right? Like you have to update those beliefs of yourself to be able to go write this book you want to write. That was a lot.
I'm wondering, because it's sort of like we have these stories, we have these beliefs. I like to look at thought like story, because it reminds me that it's made up, that it's not real. It's a
Yeah.
it's a meaning that I'm giving to something. And so I
Yes.
have these beliefs about what it might mean and what it's going to entail and what's going to happen if. And do I need to even know what they are if I know that they're stories? Like if I know that they are, it's kind of like if I was watching a movie and I thought that it was real.
Hmm.
I'm going to be scared out of my mind when I watch a scary movie.
Yeah.
I'm going to be, like literally running out of the theater because when somebody on screen, like a slasher movie or something, like that's
Yeah.
terrifying. It would be
Yeah.
absolutely terrifying. But I could sit there and watch that movie knowing fully that it's a movie and actually enjoy it, or go, I don't like this movie. This is awful. This feels horrible. I'm going to get up and walk out and watch another movie. Because like as we're talking, I'm starting to see more, which is really good. And thank you for letting me be so self-indulgent to talk about my own thing.
What else is there? That's my favorite
I
topic.
know that I'm like, oh, the whole thing is a story that it has to be anything. Like, so in other words, what I'm getting is I could just show up and do a little bit of something.
Hmm.
Just do a little bit of something, which is such a relief in what you're saying, in the approach that Be Current has, is like, just break it down to something that, you know, even if something still comes up at some point, it's probably going to be less, but it's also a lot easier to handle any of those,
Smaller
those
ones.
stories that come up around it with like, oh, I'm just going to do this. And
Hmm.
I've done that for myself so many times, tricked myself into things. I tricked myself into starting a new business
Yeah.
by doing a 100 conversations challenge and like, and starting with 10 conversations. I can do 10. I
Hmm.
can do 10. I'm not starting a business. I'm not worrying about identifying my ideal client and what kinds of coaching I'm going to do and I'm just going to do this one thing. I'm
Hmm.
going to do one conversation at a time, like one,
Right.
that's it. And
Right.
one thing. And I did that with writing 50,000 words. I didn't write 50,000 words in a day. I think that's impossible. I mean, maybe
Right.
someone could do it, but not me.
Right.
I was like, I'm going to write this right now. And I don't believe that excuse anymore. Like whenever I hear it, I don't even hear it anymore come out of my mouth because I know it's not true that I don't have time. I find time. Time finds me when something really wants to be done. And
Hmm.
it could be like tiny little pieces.
Hmm.
It's much more of a relief that way. Yeah. So it is much kinder.
Hmm. It's also, it's going to get it done. That's why I was suggesting that we first
Yeah.
align ourselves,
Yeah.
because if your deeper intention is not to get it done, you can go to a writing retreat for a month and a half in Bali and you won't
Totally
write a
makes sense.
word.
Yeah.
Somehow your computer will get lost and you'll, whatever. Like there'll be ways that you will sabotage, even if the circumstances are amazing. And of course, the circumstances could be, like, I think my first book I wrote when I was the busiest of my entire life, even to this day. But, can I do 15 minutes a day? Well, I wake up at 6. Why don't I wake up at 5:45? It's not that big of a difference. And then do 15 minutes right there. So if you are doing it and your psyche is aligned with it, you will find a way. If it's not, you will find a way not.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
So what is that aligning then? What do you see about that? Is it just simply noticing or honoring that? Like, hey, that's with compassion, right? Like, of course I wouldn't do it if it looks like it's going to hurt me. Of course I
Yeah.
wouldn't.
There's a few things. One, often people are afraid that if they don't force themselves, it's not going to happen. Like the way they've accomplished is by violating their own desires and their own needs and their own, they put themselves in situations where they do jobs they don't really want to do, and maybe they stay up way late because they compensate the fact that they're not super organized by not sleeping enough, and so all these I would call them non-caring behaviors add up to almost like a part of us buys the story, as you were saying a second ago. We don't have to buy that story, but a lot of us do. We buy that if we don't do it that way, by force and by will and by sheer military style, then we won't do anything at all. And so there is a moment, which is funny that I never even saw that. There's a parallel to my food. When I healed my relationship to my unhealthy eating, the first step was this psychiatrist in France who had said, for 3-4 days, go ahead. I mean, actually not 3-4 days. He didn't limit it. Just eat whatever you want. And I had been on diets and fat farms and eating grapefruits for 3 months and nothing else. I had done so many abusive, very violent, I look to now, behaviors towards myself. And he unleashed the gate, when the bull is behind the gate, and you just opened that gate and was like, the more you go all the way into freedom, and the better and the healthier you'll be in that relationship, which was terrifying. What am I going to regain all this weight? What am I going to gain even more? What's going to happen to me? And for 3 days, I did indeed eat mostly Nutella. I remember it was a combination of Nutella with condensed sweet milk. Those tubes that you should.
Yeah. Oh my God.
My poor liver probably went what's happening? But I'm thinking that it's a similar thing. When I first work with someone, I do a version of that. What if you actually did what you want to do, not what you should, not what you think other people think you should, mm-hmm. not what you think is going to make you money, so that's okay to put up with all sorts of whatever. The first step is really, can we strip this down? Who are you? What do you want? What is your, you did with your coaching, what those questions are. I mean, that's the privilege we have as humans. I don't know what dogs think about, but I'm pretty sure it's not, I wish I had more money so I could buy organic food or something, right? It's not, they're peacefully, joyfully doing their day, kind of possibly your, do you say heroine here as a hero for a shiro?
Yeah, we could say that.
Shiro,
or we could call her a protagonist. She's actually not she's a central character, but she's not the main character, which is really interesting too. But yes, you can call her a heroine. That works.
So are she timeless human? That's kind of what I'm hearing when you describe her as that. It's can I be in this moment? Can I not carry the heavy whatever from my past? And can I not project the whatever to my future? Can I just be in this moment? That is what's healed my food. And that is what's healing my tasks and my relationship to what I do, is that when I sit to eat, I will ask my body, what do you want right now? What is a nurturing? Do you need more carbs because you've been, eating too much protein? Or is this the opposite? If I don't start my day with protein, my insulin goes crazy and I tend to want pasta by 2:00 or, different foods that are not as nurturing or full of nutrients for me. And so I think our relationship to tasks is similar. Can I not put on try for a day, for 2 days, for a week, whatever you can, for an hour, for God's sake. Some people, they really have a life where they don't feel so in control of their own hours in many ways. And so start there. If you were given an hour a day, what would you do if it was just your joy, And most people, it's not going to go to the bank or, pick up the dry clean, whatever. It's going to be play guitar or go on the beach and do nothing and be with my kids or be with myself or whatever. It's going to be more essential things that somehow we treat as the least valuable on the deck. It's the last of the to-do is if I really finish all those things, hint to the humanity, it's not happening. We're not finishing anything. It's just coming and coming and coming and, it's not stopping. So if we don't have our own boundaries that says on Wednesday afternoon, I go walk bare feet on a beach, whatever that is for you. Right. And so for this book, to kind of bring it around, it's the idea that you would say, I'm just going to take 20 minutes. I don't care. It doesn't have to be very long. Or it could be an hour. I'm just going to sit with her and I'm going to maybe write some words, maybe not. And I'm going to let her float in my head and I'm going to see where she takes me. And I'm going to maybe play with titles and you just give yourself that freedom. At first, maybe you'd be rambling and it wouldn't be that structure. But when this guy in France, that psychiatrist made me do it, after 3 days, I was okay, I'm done with Nutella and because my body was like, wow, what are you doing to us? It's like there's zero nutrient. Might as well eat paper. There's nothing in there other than, toxins really. And so after that, it was like, oh, I feel like I want a salad, or I feel like I want a, piece of fish, or it balanced itself out because I was no longer trying to control it, by sheer will, which
Mm.
we do so much. We do so much of what we do, we think is good for us, comes out of, why do you go to the gym? Because I have to. I don't know. How about you find a sport that you really love doing and you do that? How would that feel like, you know, to do our lives more from that place? I dream of that for humanity, that we would have, even if some of our life, I mean, yes, we have to do things sometimes we don't really want to do, but how do at least do we approach the ones we don't have to do in a different way, in a more cooperative way?
Mm. Yeah, I see that too. I've seen it with myself. I see it with my client playmates, this how they have trained themselves to do things by beating themselves up,
Yeah.
by creating deadlines and rules and then making themselves do it, and something horrible is going to happen and they drive themselves with a whip to
Yeah.
this thing. It's and make themselves miserable. And like, what I hear, the invitation and what you're saying is like, what if you just give yourself permission to do what you really want? Take the pressure off just for a little bit, just for a short time,
Yeah.
because you find out that, maybe the first time you do binge Nutella, or
Mm-hmm.
you do like just lie on the floor and do absolutely nothing at first because
Mm-hmm.
you're so exhausted. That's what you need from
Yes.
driving yourself. But at
Yeah.
some point, and I see this, the less I do pressure, the more productive I am, the more I show up, the more creative, the more space, the more things flow, and it's more fun. And when things are more fun, I tend to stay with them more.
Yes. That's what I'm
And
saying. It's like I've started
yes,
playing pickleball, which I've never really been an athlete at 350 pounds, as you can imagine, getting out of the couch, you break bones, it's so heavy. But now I play pickleball and I play twice a day. And I literally, the other day was raining and I was like, can we still go play? Like my body was like so excited to go. And I was just remembering all these years where it'd be like all these excuses and hurting my body, to not have to go. And now that I'm aligned, I mean, so let's go back to that because that was a really good question you asked. Like,
yeah,
what does that mean to align ourselves, right? And there's a lot of work that's being done. And some of it I teach and some of it, you can find out there. But the idea is to at least start with hearing, like Byron Katie does this beautiful work called The Work, where she'll say, is that really true? Like, is that really true that you're lazy? It's like, well, I was told I was lazy, but is that true? And it's like, I'm like the least lazy human I know. Like, I'm so not lazy, but I was told my whole life as a child, until I was in my early 20s, that I was a lazy bum, and so I would get up and I would try to do something, but already there was this fight of like, well, wait, if I'm lazy, why that doesn't work? Like, well, how is that? And so all this energy is spent managing this lies. That's what they are, right? Lies. I mean, maybe I'm lazy, but maybe I'm lazy because I'm bored and what you're making me do is completely uninteresting to me, or maybe the way you're talking to me does not inspire me and I need to find a different tribe, but to bring it down, I think it's a exercise in self-awareness. That's how, every time I'm with people that are like this weekend, actually, I spend time with someone who's very smiley, but very angry. Like I could
mm,
see, like she was putting out this front a lot and she was just like a lot, and I could sense this anger that was riding under. And I found myself wanting to eat more. There was something in the room that was kind of a lie, a denial, something like that. And I found myself like, wow. And so I caught it right away. I was like, wow, I don't usually want any of these foods. What's happening? And I tracked it down that there was and for me, that's that. For you, it would be something else. For you, it would have maybe triggered, a desire to be even more in touch with yourself. But to me, that triggered like, I want to be sleepy right now. Like, I want to cut the edges. I don't want to be aware of this dissonance. Dissonance is the way I perceived it, is there
mm,
was this who she is and what she was putting. And there's beautiful stories, she shared some at the end of the trip, that was very vulnerable about where she's from and about how if you don't smile in that house, you get, kicked around, and really, which gave me a lot of compassion. But still, the way that 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 space was occupied where we were made me want to go, sleepy. And I caught it really quickly. And I was
Mm,
like, wow, how about we go for a walk with ourselves? Not, like, how about we remove ourselves for a little bit? And then I came back and I was a lot more able to be present and conscious and want to stay with myself as opposed to want to escape myself. So how do we discover those things? We catch what we say. We catch
mm,
how we feel in some certain environments. Maybe you catch that when you write in the morning, it's super fluid. And if you try to do it at night, not so much. So it's like, great, let's try to understand what that is and how do I accompany myself through, like you would do with a child. Ideally you'd listen and you'd adjust and you'd be creative to really attend to this pain. We, all of us
mm,
human, that's one of our conditions. We feel pain, you know.
mm, mm. What I'm hearing through what you're saying, and like what I'm receiving from it anyway, is, oh yeah, I know when I'm out of alignment.
Mm-hmm.
Anytime I feel tight, constricted, whether it comes in the form of sleepy, grumpy, sad, not that those things are bad, but I know I'm out of alignment and I know where to get back into alignment
Mm-hmm.
is like present right here.
Mm-hmm.
In a second, I'm back in right
Mm-hmm.
now. And then when I'm not feeling it, I'm out again. Oh, okay, cool. Come back.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's very, this is what I learned through this character that I wrote.
Mm-hmm.
It turned out she's like, she's got a window and she has knowledge somehow. Without knowing specifics of the past, she knows everything she needs to know for right now
Mm-hmm.
and just for right now. Like not for, maybe like the next couple hours. And then it just drops off and she's right where she is. And
Mm-hmm.
it's frustrating for other characters. It's perplexing. She's been
Mm-hmm.
diagnosed with schizophrenia and atypical schizophrenia and dyschronia, I think it's called, or which is a time disorder, like, but she taught me, and the things that come out of her mouth, like that's the beautiful thing about unleashing that kind of creative freedom, is that I saw things that I didn't know. I learned things through the writing of that book. And that's the journey of it. But I mean, why couldn't that be the case for continuing to find the form that it wants to take, whether it's a movie or a book or a whatever, a series of short stories? I have no idea.
And it's interesting because the second you brought her up, which characters take a life of their own, right? Like they'll tell you what they want to be
Mm-hmm.
and where they're going. And the second you started talking about her, there was this sense in me that I've never really thought about it that way, that I've never really read about it that way. There was like a sound of something really unique and really original, which I don't even know how to explain why, because there might be a book that's exactly that in the bookstore, but there's a sense of like, it rings the bell of, ooh, that's kind of something I've not heard about. And so I'll gift you with something that was gifted to me years ago when I was about to go do my TED Talk, and I was scared like out of my mind. I had never actually done too much speaking in public, and I started with a TED Talk, of course, let's just throw it as a TEDx, but still.
Dive into the deep end right
Oh
away.
yeah. And it
Just
was
jump
like in
in.
San Francisco with all these like super powerful people. And I was like sharing the stage with people I super respect. I mean, it was just like the conditions were horrifying. And as I'm being mic'd, I'm like next, right? Like the person's finishing whatever the person before me was doing, and they're miking me. And I'm like, my legs are paralyzed. I cannot go. Like I can't, I mean, physically, like it's not even like I can will myself, right? It's just like, it's not happening. And so Gay Hendricks was a dear friend of mine, whom I called, and I said, I cannot go. I'm at the stairs. They're about to call me up. I'm not going to be able to do it. And he said, well, the first thing he said is take a breath, because there was such anxiety that we were like, anxiety does not survive when you slow down, so just find a way to slow yourself down. So that was first advice. It was very powerful. And the second thing he said is, look out to the room right now and can you spot one person that you might be helpful for? Like because my talk was about losing the weight and kind of surviving in a world of, thin being the golden era really, and being twice the size that I'm now and this whole thing. And so I looked up and there was this lady in the middle of the room and she was overweight. And for some reason, I just felt this like deep connection to
Mm.
this young lady, and almost like I would have been in a room like that when I was that age, and who would have said something. And I said, yes, I'm seeing someone right now that could be helped by what I have to say. And he said, well, then get off your ass. It's not about you. And I got my legs back and I went on, and he was like, just, I don't care what you feel. I mean, I love you. I don't care what you feel right now, because it's really not about you. It's about this one person came and paid and had all this effort to come because maybe you have a piece of gem for her. And so please don't take that away and give it to her, please. And so there's something about this book, to think of it, but not to make it bigger than it is either, but to a little
Yes.
bit like, how is my playful exploring possibly helpful for someone? And then, I mean, to me, that was a really big engine, to be of service, because it's an engine for my life. And I love being kind of like directed, this is where you're going, because that's going to, be really helpful for someone. And so maybe this book is going to change the life of someone that could be really helpful. So
Mm.
sometimes that's what transcends us, It's like
Thank
it
you.
needs to come out.
What jumps out at me in that you said is it's not about you, Steph, because I'm living, the more I live my life, not about me, not that it's
Yeah.
about anybody else
Yes. That's the
instead,
key.
but it's
Yes.
just not about me. It's
Yes.
just this thing coming through me. Like, oh, it's not, just bring it through. That's all you have. It's not, it has nothing to do with little Stephanie. Nothing at all. Not, doesn't say anything about her, doesn't mean anything about her. We don't need to judge anything about her because of how she does this or what happens with it. Just do the thing.
Yes. And yet, what you're going to write, think of it that way too. Nobody can write it. So it's this crazy thing where it's like, it's all about you, and it's absolutely not about you all at once. That's why so many people are so confused, because if you do it for others, you effed, like there's no doing
Yeah.
that's really, that has longevity if you're doing it, for that. And as you said, it's not about doing it for this other one person. It's really just doing it not in the name of your ego. That's like, oh, I
Yes.
want to have a book in a bookstore one day. That's not a super interesting engine to me. But also be comfortable with the fact that what you're going to say, nobody in the whole world would say it exactly the way you say it. And that kind of gets over the, am I good enough? Do I have something to say? It's like, yeah, because nobody,
Mm-hmm.
and that's true for all of us. That's what's crazy. It's like, maybe not all of us comes out in the form of a book, but somehow this universe is well designed that there's a chair that's waiting for you to come and sit and be that. And I don't know if it's a guitar player or a banker or a writer or a coach. I don't care. But there's a music that happens inside of us when I just went to watch Jake, what's his last name? I'm not going to remember. Shinga Kumbaro.
Mm.
It's wrong. But it's in that vicinity. Well, you can find him because he's a ukulele player, and there's not many. And he's like the best ukulele player in the world. And this guy that I've seen, and this guy comes on stage with his little, like his instrument is like this big. And he comes on stage, and I think he's really good. And what was the most like amazing thing that I've not seen in a while is how much pleasure. And I was literally watching him do his thing, and I was like, I've never seen anyone get so much pleasure from doing what he's doing. Like that's him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I walked out of this concert and I was like, I want to live my life like that. I want to live where it is so clear that what I'm doing right now is the best I could be doing, and it's the best use of me. And it's to find that note, where you can just, and even if you find it a few minutes a day, heck, a few hours of life, whatever, but to seek that, to seek this like resonance with ourselves, and that somehow when you're a pear tree, you find that you are doing pears. You're not doing apples. You're a pear tree.
Yeah.
And somehow to discover what that is, I think is so juicy.
Mm. Yeah. I find it whenever I drop out of my thinking about the past and the future and all this other crap, and I'm just right here. And it's a way of being more even than, of course, the doing comes from it, right? The pears come from it because I'm a pear tree in this
Yes,
example,
yes,
but
yeah,
but the pear tree is still itself even when it's not in season and it doesn't have pears. But of
yeah,
course, it's going to have pears,
yeah,
and
yes.
it's just that. It's just being what it is. Oh, I love that. Oh, thank you, Sophie. That was beautiful.
Thank you. You
Mm.
ask beautiful questions.
Oh, it's a beautiful space. So if people are interested, I hear you have a quiz or something, yes, on your website and that
I
can
do,
help
and it
people.
really, it's probably one of the hardest thing I've ever done actually to create this quiz because it really, it's not one of those like, hey, you wake up in the morning and you know what you're doing. Great, you're productive. Hey, you don't, you suck. There's a lot of things out there that I kind of like, so it's not that. It really, I dug deep, 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 deep in like having worked with so many people for so long and identifying those archetypes, like what are the buckets that most people seem to be, and there's 5 of them. So when you take the quiz, it will ask questions to really help you identify. And the reason it's interesting is from that self-awareness place. Because if you are, say, a creativator, which I am, a creativator is someone who has a lot of ideas and has a good balance with creating a lot of things, but also executing a lot of things. There are people that are super creative and that have a harder time executing, for example, or there are people that are super good executing people, but they're not as connected to their purpose, and so on and so forth. And so I'm really inviting people to take it from a place of knowing more about yourself, and then you can team with people that are maybe the other kind, and that somehow that births something that maybe with your own quality or profile is a little bit harder to pull off. So I would definitely recommend people to go. It's on the website, which is becurrenttoday.com. And it's on the front page. You can go do it and receive a description of what some of the gifts, some of the challenges, and really use it to accompany yourself and understand yourself a little bit better.
Hmm. Beautiful. Awesome. And is there anything else that you'd like to leave people with? Like what do you think would make the biggest difference in people finding that note, that resonance that we were talking about of them?
Wow. Well, what came is peace in the world, probably, right? If all of us were in harmony, I think part of what makes people not be at peace and be at war comes from not having found what aligns them inside of them often. Like I know as I was developing my own self-love, it became difficult to hurt others. I
Mm-hmm.
used to not care, really. I mean, I don't even know that I was super conscious that I was possibly, but the more you love yourself, the more it becomes like it becomes difficult to not be at peace with others. And, so my gut is if we were to align more and more of us did, it would have this flavor. And as we talked about earlier, delivering a baby is a heck of a chaotic. Peace is not a quiet, it has lots of waves and lots of noise and lots of crashing. And because it's in the searching, that I mean, I've not known you that long, but I know you've worked on yourself. You didn't get to this place that we're talking from without having done a good amount of work. And so it's that same combination. It's like it takes a good amount of work to be and not play into our fears and games and stories.
Mm, thank you. And that I like that language is in the title of your book, to warrant a piece of cake. That
Yes,
when is
War
this coming out?
it's coming out as soon as I can get my little booty to complete, but I'm there. It's very close. So in the spring, it'll be available.
Oh,
And there's an
cool.
audio version, which I'm taping this coming week, actually.
You're
Yeah.
doing the audio yourself?
Yeah, well, I'm coming to LA to a friend of mine has a studio. We're gonna record it together. But yeah.
Oh, beautiful. Oh, I
Mhm.
can't wait. Oh, well, thank you so much, Sophie. This has
Thank
been such a
you. This was one
pleasure.
of my absolute. You ruined it for everybody else. I'm gonna be like, ask me better questions.
Thanks so much for joining me for today's Wildspire conversation. If you'd like to receive a weekly Wildspire email from me filled with inspiring stories, unmarketing experiments, tips for playing your way to impact and income without the hustle and hype, insights from my spiritual business journey, and more, go to theawakenedbusiness.com/wildspire. Until next time, may you know yourself as the gorgeous wild creation you are.